Welcome. It's just gone 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 20th of March, and you are watching Regional Wrap, episode 125. Regional Wrap, providing an insight on the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode, locally mitigating against extreme weather events, is Professor Jonathan Nott. Jonathan is Adjunct Professor of Geoscience at the College of Science and Engineering, James Cook University, Cairns. He has held the appointment at the Charles Darwin University and the Australian National University. Jonathan has undertaken research into extreme natural events such as river floods, tsunamis, tropical cyclones, and specialises in post-event surveys, both in Australia and overseas. He also specialises in the reconstruction of long-term natural records of these extreme events, providing a more realistic guide to the long-term behaviour of these hazards and can be used as a basis for estimating their return intervals and the risk assessment. Jonathan has published numerous articles on these topics in international referred journals and has provided a first detailed review of the techniques involved in reconstructing these long-term records in his book, Extreme Events, published by Cambridge University Press in 2006. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you, Bill.
I've contacted you a little while ago, just after Cyclone Jasper hit our region up here in Far North Queensland, and sort of devastated a lot of areas from nearly Ingham up to Cooktown. And it was a fairly strange event in regards to there was a lot of warnings and that in regards to the cyclone itself. And the event happened, and we sort of, we thought we got away with that pretty well. And the next minute, the rain event following seemed to catch everyone by surprise. Is that your take on it, that the rain event was sort of not sort of forewarned as much as the cyclone itself?
Yeah, that's pretty well how I see it. Sure, the cyclone came through. It came through north of Cairns, between sort of Daintree and Wudjil. It was a Cat 2. Here in Cairns, it wasn't really a big event at all. Cat 1, if that, in terms of its severity. And then the cyclone moved inland across Cape York Peninsula and stalled. It slowed down, sat there for a while. That generated a convergence zone of winds coming onto the coast, the east coast of Cape York, including Cairns and north towards Daintree and Wudjil. And then a mid-level trough started to develop and moved east, started to develop over Cape York and moved east and sat over Cairns. So that was about 4 days after the cyclone crossed the coast. And that trough just continued to intensify and just bring more and more winds onto the coast, very moisture-laden winds. And, with the orographic uplift, that's the uplift of the air going up over the escarpment here in the Cairns region, the wet tropics region. It just generated a lot of rainfall. So it was really the stalling of the system, the intensification of the mid-level trough right over Cairns, which led to that rainfall and then the record flooding.
I'll just go through a bit of a montage of how the Cairns Post saw these events. I'll just share that to the screen. This was the day before the cyclone crossed the coast, and we were all sort of prepared, and we had been getting fairly good warnings beforehand. And we also got information to make people worry a bit about flooding of Cairns itself with possible storm surge and high tides. So that was before. This is the day of Jasper, just staring down Jasper. So there was plenty of publicity about it. And of course, they even took the preventions of bringing extra staff, SES people, swift water rescue up to the Cairns area to prepare for the event. And the day after, it said, after it hit, it said the worst is over. Although we did have power outages just before the cyclone crossed, this is probably where we fell into a trap of getting a bit complacent or something. So we had a few more stories about the events of the cyclone itself. And of course, pictures of North Queensland is sort of a bit blasé about it. You can see on the screen, we just think it's a good bit of fun. And then the next thing is the rain. And with the riverbanks of I think one of the first places to be affected was up in Mosman with the river up there. And then we started to get hit home down here in Machin's Beach and along the Barron. This is several days later. We started to get these are inside Holloway's Beach in a house there. I think this picture up the top here is the breaking in the Palmerston Highway, which was pretty well fractured, and that's down on I think that's towards Holloway's Beach where it was cut through. The Barron River's trying to cut through here, and then it continued. We're up to 4 days later. This is the run out to Machin's Beach from the Point Cook Captain Cook Highway, and that's the floodplains of the Barron River. So that's 19th of December. That's 5 days later, and we have our airport still inundated, and people being rescued in Machin's Beach and that. And I think the final one, I think that's also the breaking down towards Holloway's Beach. And of course, we'll need billions to fix this up. This is the Captain Cook Highway. I think it's up past Alice Beach up to Rex Lookout or Wangetti, being pretty well severed. More floodplains, and I think the last one is this is the 20th of December. Our airport is actually back in action after it was sort of out of action for a while because of the water over the runways. So we had a fairly good time scale there of from before it hit to almost 7 days later. So it did we were forewarned. They did a reasonable effort to get people up here from down in Brisbane area and that for Swift River. We're prepared, but the event just seemed to go on, and we're still suffering the damages at the moment.
Yes. Yep. Sure. Yep. That's a pretty good summary, I think, of exactly what went on. Yep.
And now that we've the bills are going to start coming in, and we're going to have to spend money to get this repaired. Of course, there's federal government assistance and there's also state government assistance, but there's also a difference between local government infrastructure that is their responsibility and what is state responsibility, and also Fed responsibility, as in the Bruce Highway part of it. The indications are from all the councils that their costs are going to be somewhere between the $100 and $200 million hit to the ratepayers in general. We don't really want to get this bill, of course, and we certainly don't need it every other few years. So what can we do, or what should we be doing about planning to mitigate, especially on the local level, that council's sort of responsible for, to sort of mitigate these events in the future?
Well, first of all, let me say that we here in Cairns live in a very hazardous location. You know, I worked at, I was a full-time academic at James Cook University, Cairns for 25 years. I started there in 1995 when the campus first opened. And that whole time I taught a subject in natural hazards, which was all about this sort of stuff, you know, about the hazard itself and about the vulnerability of the community, the ways of mitigation and ways of increasing resilience in the community and risk in general. And I always said to them that if you were going to design a city in Australia and create a worst case scenario for a natural hazard, let's choose some natural hazards, say tropical cyclones or river floods, then you don't have to go any further than look at Cairns. You know, the first European settlers that came here obviously didn't realise how dangerous the place was. You know, they came here for minerals, gold and other minerals in the tablelands, and then timber, and that was the attraction of being here. And Cairns was a good port, and there was a good access route down over the escarpment here to build a railway. So Cairns became that place. But really, Cairns is probably the most vulnerable location in all of Australia in terms of extreme events or disasters from natural hazards. So if we just put it into perspective, we've got an airport that's lined with mangroves. It literally sits in the tidal zone. We have both of our hospitals, again, in the storm surge zone, only a matter of a few metres above sea level. We have our SES, we have ambulance, we have council, we have police, emergency services, main electricity substation, all within the storm surge zone in Cairns. Our radio stations, our key radio stations, which are lifelines during a disaster, are in the flood zone, storm surge zone in Cairns. In all honesty, you couldn't make a worst case scenario than that. And that was recognised in 1999 when the then Australian Geological Survey Organisation, who is now known as Geoscience Australia, so that's our national geological survey based in Canberra, they decided to sort of diversify their portfolio, so to speak, and start studying natural hazards. And they did a national assessment of the most hazardous locations in the country. And what they did is they chose individual cities and they decided to do what's called a multi-hazard assessment. So they looked at all the hazards that could that could impact those particular locations. And the very first place they chose, the top of the list, was Cairns. And they generated a report. And, you know, they identified that obviously river floods were a major problem. Storm surge or marine inundation from tropical cyclones was a problem. Landslide was a particularly bad problem. And indeed, even earthquakes are a potential problem in Cairns. Not from earthquakes necessarily generated here, but even as far away as Papua New Guinea and Irian Jaya or West Papua can actually have an impact in Cairns because of the particular soils and sediments that we have here. So what I guess I'm pointing out is that we are an extremely vulnerable and exposed location. And then what we've done is we've built our suburbs in some of the most exposed locations in the area as well. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that we are really a disaster waiting to happen on a number of different fronts. They've occurred in the past. Well, river floods have occurred in the past. We know that. Big ones, bigger than we had in December in 2023. And we've not had a really big tropical cyclone hit Cairns, a severe cyclone hit Cairns in the entire time that Europeans have been in Cairns, that came to Cairns in 1876. We've been spared from that, and that has generated all sorts of wacky myths about cyclones in Cairns. And we also know that we've had massive landslides in the form of debris flows that have impacted Cairns, and they've built really nice places to live. They've sort of smoothed out the landscape towards the base of the escarpment. And we've decided to build our suburbs on those landslide deposits. And they're multi-generational. That means that there's numerous landslide deposits deposited or placed on top of one another. And these are big, big features. They contain boulders the size of small cars that have come down in the past. And we've studied those, we've analysed those, we've geologically dated those. And so we've done a lot of work on this sort of thing. So I guess what I'm saying is that, first of all, we're a really, really exposed and dangerous location. So your question, what do we do about it? That's really, really difficult. It takes a whole range of sectors of society to sit down and first of all acknowledge that we are an exceptionally, and I emphasize that, exceptionally exposed location. Take Townsville. They've moved their hospital to the university, which is inland. So they've got a hospital for patients to go to. Even if we don't get hit by a severe event, take Cyclone Yasi. Vance was in Western Australia many years before. Yasi in 2011. Now, Yasi was tracking towards Cairns. The models all showed that it was going to veer towards the southwest and go down towards Mission Beach, which is exactly what it did. But just the threat that it might hit Cairns caused us to evacuate both hospitals. We had to evacuate everybody. The military had to come in and fly.
But wasn't it when they found that there was no real escape route for all of us at once?
There was no what, sorry?
No escape route for all of us at once, because out of the Bruce Highway was going to be choked.
Well, that's exactly right. That's precisely right. So they evacuated the hospitals. Now, some people never got to see their loved ones again, because people who were, at the end of their life were evacuated to Brisbane and elsewhere. And unfortunately, they died and they weren't with their loved ones when that occurred. So that in itself is a real disaster. So you can see the problem without even being hit directly by a flood or storm surge with the hospitals, how vulnerable we are. And you're just talking about escaping. Well, yep, highways are flooded. There can be landslides to the north, exactly as has occurred with the rains after Cyclone Jasper. Kuranda Range is closed when the winds get to about 75 kilometres an hour. So even if there hasn't been landslides, that's automatically closed. That's part of the strategy. And the airport gets flooded with either storm surge or river flood waters.
So you can't fly people in and you can't fly people out.
That's exactly right. So look, I know, lots of people have called me Dr. Doom over the years, but I'm just pointing out the obvious here, that, the first thing we need to do is acknowledge just how susceptible or, how exposed we are to these sorts of events. And then we need to start thinking about how we're going to plan around this and what we're going to do about it. But unfortunately, a lot of people kind of put their head in the sand and say, oh, look, it won't happen to us. It's okay. John, you're raising the alarm bells. You're a scaremonger. You're stirring people up. You're going to devalue property prices with all of this hullabaloo that you're going on with. Stop talking about it. We don't want to hear you saying these sorts of things because it'll stop investment in Cairns. It'll stop tourism in Cairns, or, slow it down or whatever. And so, people don't want to know about it, and they don't like the idea that the word disaster is ever linked with Cairns, either during a disaster or the potential for a disaster, because of the impacts, the perceived impacts that they think it could have on the economy. So the first thing we've got to do is acknowledge just how dangerous it is. And the Australian Geological Survey, or Geoscience Australia, pointed that out in 1999. So it's there in colour, in documents, and it's been spelled out to us by an independent authority. But we basically still effectively, and I emphasise the word effectively, choose to ignore it.
I think one of the problems is locals sometimes get emotive about things, about their place and all those sort of things, because I do remember the history when the airport was sold. It was owned by Cairns Council and I think Ports North or something back in history. And the government, Brisbane government decided to sell it off on the basis that we'd get a new hospital. And the local, I suppose, local contingent of people who feel good about the place actually opposed the building of a new place, a new hospital in a new location, and just wanted to keep it where it was and refurbished. So yes, we've got a refurbished hospital, but it's still can bear the brunt of any disaster that heads in from the Coral Sea.
It's exactly right. I mean, it's to be blunt about it, it's absolutely crazy. It's a stupid idea. It's the worst thing you could possibly do.
So sometimes you think, well, sometimes you have to overrule the feeling of the general population and their emotions, and with some hard-headed decision making. Because to me, it seemed to be because I'm not from Cairns, I'm from Western Australia. I know a little bit about the history of cyclones in Australia and things like that, and I thought it would be a golden opportunity to take if someone says, "Oh, you can have a new hospital somewhere, at another location." So, you've got this old hospital that's got to be serviceable until the new one's ready. The new one's got to be in a more central location or a better location to service Cairns anyway, and it's got to be safer. But the people in the power sort of listen to the emotions of the people who live here.
Well, yes, I'm not exactly sure what was going on at the decision-making table with regards to expanding the hospital. And we've got a great hospital. Don't get me wrong on that. Obviously, we've got a fantastic hospital, two great hospitals in Cairns with really modern facilities, and and they provide a vital link for people as far as Torres Strait and even PNG. When there's severe cases of things like tuberculosis and stuff that might be occurring in PNG, those people can come to Cairns and be isolated and treated. So it's a really, really important hospital to service a very, very big region. And we do have a first-rate facility, clearly. But why you would build it on the beachfront in storm surge zone is just beyond me. And I realise that, well, if you're going to relocate it, you probably have to relocate it either north or south of Cairns. We at the university were quite keen to see it come to the university, but that means it's at Smithfield. So people at Gordonvale, etc., are a long way from the hospital. And if you put it down, Edmonton or wherever, Bentley Park or something like that, then the people from the Northern Beaches are a long way from the hospital. So I can see that consideration was given to accessibility to the hospital in emergencies, etc. So, just the general geography of Cairns played a role there, I'm sure. But when it comes to extreme events, then it's just an absolutely crazy idea. And I would have thought that, we needed to consider that and make that a higher priority in terms of locating the hospital. These sorts of ideas, it's not ignorance as such, but it's sort of a denial that, we are in such a dangerous location, have helped to propagate myths throughout Cairns and right throughout the general community. There is this myth that pervades Cairns, and I've had it said to me on a number of occasions that severe tropical cyclones can't hit us because they get deflected by the mountains and they get deflected to the south. So Innisfail, Mission Beach, Tully, Cardwell, Townsville, Ayr, Home Hill, etc., will get the cyclones and they just can't come in here. And there's, of course, no science to back that up. I mean, that's just absolutely ridiculous. But this sort of information is put out to the public. And there's a screenshot there, Bill, which we could bring up, and I could just point this out from the attachment that I gave you. Is that possible?
Yeah, we've got the
Could you just
page
scroll
one
down there? This is a talk I've given in the path about myths and misconceptions about tropical cyclones. But if you keep going down,
Yep.
and there's just there, just that, no, go back.
Line one back, number
One
5.
back.
Yep.
No, back to that colour brochure that I had there. No, keep, yeah, there. Okay, great.
Palm Cove.
Yeah. Now this this was a colour brochure, probably 4 pages long, glossy, and it was put out in Palm Cove in the area in 2011, and it was called the Palm Cove Whisper. And you can see there it says Palm Cove, beautiful one day, still perfect the next. Now what I've done is there's a paragraph that's on the first page there where it says whisper, and I've blown it up and put it over on the right hand side.
Yep. So
if I just read that out, and the centre, the second paragraph down, it says the centre of Yasi made landfall at Cardwell near Mission Beach, and Whispers, jumping along, and Whisper sends a special tribute to our southern neighbours in the region whom were affected. So why was Palm Cove spared? Next paragraph. On further research, Whisper discovered that all construction of new buildings and homes must be built to Category 5 cyclone rating, the highest rating. First of all, incorrect, misinformation. That is not true. Second, and I'll skip over that person's name, a particular person who has over 30 years of experience in designing resorts in the region, has his own theory, and many experts in the region back his sentiments. His theory is that Palm Cove is somewhat protected from major cyclones due to the mountains behind. He believes that as a cyclone approaches and the wind force increases, the mountains act as a deflector and the cyclone tends to track south and cross the coast on the more open plains. In fact, this was the case with Cyclone Yasi and also for Cyclone Larry in 2006. This theory may be just right. So according to the experts, Palm Cove with its pristine palm lined beachfront and strict planning controls will remain as beautiful tomorrow as it is today. Now that is just absolute garbage, complete and utter garbage. And this sort of information was being put out to the community, and particularly for people moving from interstate or desiring to come interstate and possibly buy real estate in the region. You know, this sort of information is dangerous, and it's being put out there, and a lot of people actually believe this. You know, so we have all these crazy myths in Cairns, and it tends to create a false sense of security, if you like, you know, and in that sense, you know, a lot of people have continued to believe that we just can't be hit by a severe cyclone, just can't happen here. And I think the same with flooding until last December, even though there are flood maps put out by council, which show the 1 in 100 year flood, and they're available online and have been for a number of years. People still continue to believe, oh, well, it's not going to happen to us. It can't happen to us, despite the last one happening in 1977. So we've got to get over this, and we've got to realise just how dangerous this place is, and then start planning properly in order to deal with these events.
Well, I think Australia generally is a fairly flat surface, and everyone lives on the coast. You know, about 90% of people probably live within 20 kilometres of the coast anywhere in Australia. It's been a hazard since ever, but we don't seem to learn. I mean, we've had floods. If you go back to 74, when Newcastle was hit, that was a devastating. Brisbane was hit in the same year, 74 floods. And then if you look at places like Lismore, now for goodness gracious, Lismore has a history of getting major floods because it's near the epicenter of two merging rivers, and it's forever being hit. But we don't seem to learn our lessons and say, well, maybe we just have to withdraw a little bit to higher ground or something. There's only one case I know of, and that's Grattan in the Lockyer Valley, that the government actually did actually move the township. So I think it moved it somewhere about 100 metres further up the height line than it was. But gee, it takes a lot for the powers that be to make these sort of decisions. But there again, I suppose it's because the cost of it's so horrific.
Yeah, well, yes, that's exactly right. I mean, you know, well, we have to get to the bottom of it and say, well, why? Why is this occurring? You know, why do we continue to allow a development in really, really dangerous locations? And essentially, it's viewed as, well, we have to determine a level of risk. What risk is acceptable? Because we need economic development. There's tremendous pressure on local governments and on state government for urban development and tourism development throughout eastern Queensland. And they say, well, okay, so what are we willing to lose for the economic gains that we can make immediately and in the near future? So let's think about that. So normally the economic gains outweigh, the potential losses in the future. Indeed, I've never really seen a detailed study which has looked at the potential losses in terms of, the economic impact of a major disaster versus the economic gains being made for development in the area. And, when these events occur and everyone starts to scream and cry out and, say this is terrible, this is the cost, and you were talking before of, however hundreds of millions of dollars you were talking about that it's going to cost the ratepayers of the Cairns region to deal with this flood and elsewhere. This is what we get. This is where we start suffering the losses of all of this based upon the economic gains. So really,
I
that's what it boils
suppose,
down to.
I suppose then people probably will only wake up when it hits their hip pocket. And also, I suppose the other factor is when you can never insure your property again, because after this event, I think a number of insurance companies will be having a serious look at their premiums in certain locations. And I was particularly worried about new developments. I mean, there's a development for Half Moon Bay or something. I think it's down Trinity Parkway, and they're talking about putting 200 dwellings on it of various sizes and shapes and that. And it's basically sitting on the foreshore of the Coral Sea, and then it has a creek winding around the back of it. I can't think of a place where if you put up 250 new dwellings, that you got to find your insurer who's got to give you a reasonable price premium.
Well, this is a real problem. Yes, insurance is a real problem. And you are right. And indeed, I did hear an interview with a man from the Insurance Council of Australia just the other week, following these events in Far North Queensland, talking about this exact sort of thing. And he said that, there's going to come a point where, they're going to stop insuring certain areas because they're just too exposed to extreme events, because the potential for them to make losses is too high. So, this is on the cards. And also our insurance premiums go up. Now, I don't know just how well the general community understands that we all pay for these developments. So when these new developments go in, it hits us already in our hip pocket. We don't have to have a disaster, because the insurance and reinsurance industry, as part of their assessment to work out their potential losses, they will look at just how many properties are exposed. Of course they will. The more properties that are exposed, the more expensive they are, then the greater their potential losses. And that's what they're hedging against, and that's what we're paying for. So if the potential losses go up, then our premiums go up. Now, councils don't like to say this. Indeed, Some councils actually say on their websites they have nothing to do with insurance, the hike in insurance premiums. Well, that's just a complete furphy. Of course it is. You know, allowing new developments to go in dangerous locations is recognised by the insurance industry as being a potential loss. So we all actually start paying for this. And it would be great if the community would understand this and recognise that it's already affecting us. So you're right. And then there will come a time when we're not going to be able to be insured. And then when disasters occur and people lose their homes or suffer huge financial burden from the impact of that disaster, then they're not going to be able to afford to fix it up. And, for example, at Tully Heads, after Cyclone Jasper came through, there were houses there that were literally washed away by the storm surge, just washed away off their stumps, off their foundations, and people weren't insured. They didn't have insurance. A lot of people didn't have insurance for marine inundation, and they haven't been able to rebuild. They've just suffered a complete loss there. This sort of thing is going to continue to occur, and it's going to happen in bigger locations, whether it's Cairns, and Cairns is the most vulnerable, or maybe Townsville or Mackay or parts of Gladstone. This is going to continue to occur, and it's going to be devastating. And this is really where the rubber hits the road in terms of us paying for it through our hip pockets. So I hope that people in the community realise that we're already being affected and speak out about this and try and push governments into taking some real action in lessening our exposure to these extreme events.
Well, that's going to be pretty hard, because they want, if you talk about Cairns and the general council and business people, they're looking forward to the day when Cairns has 250,000 people. It's got around about 150,000 now in the greater Cairns area, and they're looking forward to another 100,000 in another 10, 15 years. You can't do that without putting people in more dangerous situations, unless you really decide to set aside conditions to make sure people don't build in dangerous places. But just getting back to the geography of Cairns, it is very low-lying for most of it, and then we pushed up against the ranges. So it's a very narrow strip. In the southern section, we've probably got a bit of wider area, but as you go up north, it's probably no more than 2 kilometres in a lot of places from the coast to the ranges, and sometimes the ranges actually come down to the road to the coast that you can't get over. So this pinch we're in, will we have to really face the inevitability that we need to set a quota, or say, well, we just can't keep putting people in and putting into a dangerous situation. We have to, have some cutoff or some sensible guidelines just so we don't expose people to future dangers.
Well, I would think so. Yes, if we're going to be serious about reducing exposure, and that's the key term that I like to use, exposure. Putting people in the path of these hazards. That's what I mean when I say about exposure. People and assets, buildings, infrastructure, etc. Then we're going to have to really do some serious thinking. And our economic model that we rely upon, which is growth at all costs. We must increase our population. We must have growth. We must get as many people to come and move here to Cairns as we possibly can, and we must have as many people come and visit Cairns as we possibly can, and therefore have accommodation for them, and forget about everything else. Don't worry about exposure. Let's just go ahead and do all of that. We definitely need to change our thinking around this. We really do, because that's the problem. That is the rub. That's it. We're just continuing to push people, and you mentioned Half Moon Bay, there where there are already some very dangerous developments close to mangroves, houses, and proposed new developments. And there's new developments being put in along the beach fronts at Clifton Beach, and Palm Cove, etc., which are, again, just adding to this exposure profile. So we really do need a serious shake-up in terms of our economic models, our economic philosophy. Yeah, we've just got to do something about that. Otherwise, we're just putting people in harm's way. So it's the only way that I can see. And then, of course, the more events that we have, people are going to cry out and say, well, look, I was allowed to build here and I wasn't properly forewarned about just how dangerous this would be. I'm demanding that the government buy my property back or buy me out or relocate me. So the governments, and then of course us through rates and tax and everything else, taxes, we're all going to be burdened with these costs as well. So, it's happening in Lismore, it's happening elsewhere, and it's going to continue to happen, that this sort of thing occurs. There'll be litigation, by people too. It's already occurred. It's occurred in what used to be the Johnson Shire, but is obviously now the Cassowary Coast. It's happened in the Douglas Shire in the past with a landslide in 1996, which impacted a house. I know about these things. I was part of that landslide case when it was with the lawyers, etc. People are going to complain and say, well, look, I wasn't properly told about this. I wasn't forewarned. I wasn't told that I was allowed to build in such a dangerous location. People are going to be very upset about this. So this is all going to cost us money in the future. We are very interested in short-term gains, and we're disregarding the potential impacts in the future. And that view, that philosophy needs to change. And that's what I mean about becoming aware of just how dangerous a location we are living in.
I suppose the other thing is the expectations people have for governments and others to help them out of some future mess. And I just wonder sometimes in regards to particularly the people on the river floodplains, Holloway's Beach, Machen's Beach in particular, their expectations now may be that the council builds higher roads so they can connect them to the Captain Cook Highway, or they put in levees, or they do something. How do we or what should we do in regards to making these decisions on a sensible basis? Should there be some sort of committee and cost benefit analysis in regards to what's worth doing, what's not worth doing? Because just for instance, down on the floodplains to protect the Holloway Beach area, or the Holloways in particular, talking about levees. But to my way of thinking, if you build a levee on what is basically a mudflat and silt and that, it's not very durable, and you might be wasting a lot of money. The same way as we've seen a lot of instances where people have built seawalls and groins to sort of protect erosion. They just push the problem somewhere else. So what sort of levels of authority people should be looking into these things and making hard-nosed decisions? Because the community can't do it because they're too emotionally involved.
Well, that's right. The community are emotionally involved, and rightly so too. I mean, if you've been affected, you live at Holloways and Machen's, at Caravonica, Lake Placid, etc. You've been impacted by the flood. You're out of your home. You're having to live somewhere else, and you don't really know when you're going to be able to get back in. It's terrible. It's really, really traumatic for all of those people. Absolutely, it is, and they feel, well, they feel shattered, obviously, about it, and they want something done. They don't want to have to continue going through this and think that where they live is just going to continue to be impacted in this way. So, decisions need to be made sure by an independent group of people. We can't have people who are subject to economic gains from development be making these sorts of decisions, because obviously that's going to be biased. We need to have people who aren't as emotionally involved in this and who can weigh it up. So, for example, people might say, well, look, we really want levees around the beaches, Machins, Holloways, etc., maybe even Yorkies, to protect us from river floods from the Barron River. We want them high enough so that the floodwaters from the Barron River won't come over and flood our properties. Sure, absolutely, I get that. And that could be done. But what happens when we get a storm surge? And the storm surge floods onto the land, and the storm surge can't dissipate inland because it's trapped by the levees. So you're getting the problem from the other side, and you exacerbate the storm surge problem, potentially. We'd have to look at this in detail. So, you know, trying to fix up one problem can lead to an exacerbation of another problem, or another extreme event. So, you know, you need to have people that would weigh this up and think about this completely independently, who are not going to be emotionally involved. That doesn't mean that the people from the beaches shouldn't have a say. Absolutely, they should have a say. And also don't have people who stand to make economic gains out of any development that may occur there. So, you know, for example, if they say, all right, we're going to put in levees to protect Machins and Holloways, Yorkies, therefore we're going to make it safe. So now we can have more development there. We can expand development throughout that area. And people might be thinking along those lines and thinking, well, I can make money out of this, you know, so therefore I'm going to push this idea. We cannot have those sorts of people involved in making any sorts of decisions, because it's just going to lead us down the path that we're already going down. So we do need an independent group of people to be able to sit down and really assess this. And I would say that, sure, we need some government people in there, but it just can't be made by government, because invariably governments govern for a minority and not the majority. And that tends to be the general rule. Councils do it, state governments do it, often federal government does it, because they are most influenced by people who lobby them and who have vested financial interests. So, you know, we need truly independent advice from people who can genuinely weigh the situation up and think about risk in a holistic and moderate fashion.
I suppose the other thing is, like, I'm a little bit blasé because I'm 34 metres above sea level. So I don't have any problems with the inundation. But I suppose for those people who live on the higher parts of the landscape, there's another situation is slippage. Now, the geography or geology of Cairns seems to me to be pretty ordinary in regards to shale base, and is the geology of Cairns and its surround overly stable, or in general, or is susceptible to like landslips, probably more than what we think.
Look, the geology and the geography, the physical geography or the geomorphology, the shape of the landscape, and the climate is critical in all of this, have made Cairns particularly vulnerable to major landslides. Now, when, well, first of all, you know, the rocks that tend to dominate most of the escarpment behind Cairns are part of what we know as the Hodgkinson Formation. They're tilted and folded rocks. They're what we call metamorphic rocks, and they break down into regolith, which is the broken down rock that sits above the fresh rock, very, very quickly in this relatively hot, wet climate. You know, rocks break down quicker and more effectively when it's hot and wet. So we've got the ideal climate for rock weathering. These slopes develop these, what we call regolith mantles. That is loose material, the rotten rock, and it can be many, many meters deep. And when we get very heavy rainfall, this material slides off the slope. And depending upon the dip of the strata, that's kind of like, in some areas, the strata is sort of sloping out of the hillside, much like a slippery dip at a park, exactly like that. And so really heavy rainfall comes along, it saturates all of that regolith, and the whole lot slides down along the interface of the regolith or the rotten rock and the fresh rock underneath. And we know that this occurs because we've got these giant landslide deposits that suburbs are built on. Red Lynch Rise and right up the Freshwater Valley are all built on these landslide deposits. When these landslides come down, they smooth out the topography. They make a broad sort of apron shape, ideal for putting roads and houses on. And, you know, when we go and look at this, we can see that these are all landslide deposits. Numerous ones have occurred in the past. And we can see that it would be absolutely devastating for this sort of thing to occur again today. Now, in 1999, I mentioned the Australian Geological Survey Organisation coming here to Cairns from Canberra and mapping all this out. They were so concerned about the landslide problem that they brought in some extra consultants and did a separate, much more detailed landslide study. And I interacted with those consultants at that time, and then they published a report. We had a big launch. Cairns Post put a big front page, you know, banner on about the Cairns landslide report. We had a major launch with all the new media there and politicians there, and they mapped areas of Cairns along the slopes in terms of, they were risk maps, and they mapped it in terms of the number of deaths per square kilometre per 100 years at 1999 building levels, and the number of houses expected to be destroyed per square kilometre per 100 years at 1999 building levels. And I asked them, why did they do this? You know, why did you map it in terms of deaths and homes destroyed? And they said, well, that's what will occur. And I said, but, you know, that's really scary. You know, most people wouldn't do it like that. And they said, well, look, we're a national organisation. We come from Canberra. We're not influenced by local politics or state politics. We can do it as we see it without fear or favour. And that's exactly what the science is telling us will happen. So they did it. Now that report, and no pun intended, has been effectively buried. Okay, we've had it out there for 25 years. It's been available. And nowhere in Cairns has that report ever been used to help safeguard where it's, you know, best to live. You know, it's not available online. Council doesn't include it in their Cairns plan, which is the town plan. They've had ample opportunity to do it. They were signatories to this report at the time. The deputy mayor at the time was there at the launch. I've gone in and presented it to them. Basically, their jaws were hitting the tables at the time. And the general public just doesn't know about this. They don't know if they're buying a block of land and building a house on a spot that's really dangerous. And it's not the land that they're building on which is dangerous, it's what's happening upslope. It's the potential for the material upslope to come sliding down and crash into their houses with boulders embedded in this mud flow, which can be the size of small cars. And we know that because they're there. We can see them. They're there. So, you know, we know this occurs. And this is absolutely covered up. You know, nobody wants to deal with this or even really acknowledge just how dangerous this situation can be.
But surely that would leave people like ratepayers and taxpayers exposed if there was an event and the people affected by that event weren't searching, and I presume they'd have the ability to subpoena those sort of documents and say, well, why wasn't this? That would be fairly damning to any regional or state or federal government if the event happened and the people sought that report.
Absolutely. Well, yes, absolutely. You don't need to subpoena the document because it's available online. You can search it and download it. It is available. I've been presenting it to my students at university for decades now and showing it to them. And, you know, anybody can find it. It's not particularly easy to find, but it is available if you search hard enough. And it's all there in bright colours, you know, all of those maps are there for people to be able to see. But the key point is, and this is the approach that councils have taken in the past, various councils in the past, they were told me, one particular mayor, won't mention his name, he told me that we cannot afford to scare the punters about this. You know, we cannot afford to scare off developers and we cannot afford to scare off people buying these things. So we're not going to tell them. Now, that's literally what he told me to my face. So we're going to keep it quiet. And I said to him, well, look, you know, why don't you just let people know and let them take the risk for themselves? You know, they can know about this. And if they decide that they want to build there, knowing what the potential risk is, then so be it. But at the moment, when you don't tell them what's going on, you open yourself up to litigation if one of these events occurs in the future. And terrible as it may be, and I hope it never does occur, but people die and homes are destroyed. You know, litigation will occur, and you're right, and it'll be a major drama. So
I suppose,
council have decided not to do that. They don't want to do that.
I suppose the thing is these politicians, whether they're local government or state government or even federal government, they're usually short-term people in regards that they might do 2 or 3 terms depending how lucky they are with the elections, and then they're gone. But we, the ratepayers, and we, the taxpayers, will be here forever, and we will be the ones, basically, if there is any litigation, it's not the politicians, it's not going to come out of their pocket. No one's going to hunt them down to take their superannuation off them. What's going to happen is just going to be taxpayers' pockets hit.
Well, that's exactly right. It does come back to the taxpayers. Now, look, the state government, the Queensland government, have continued to put out various sorts of documents over the years. We used to have state planning policies on natural disasters, on natural hazards, you know, for landslide, bushfire, river flood, and storm surge. And, you know, these policies came out and they outlined what local governments are supposed to do in terms of their town plan, in terms of presenting maps, you know, which identify these sorts of things and let people know where it's safe to live. Now, that's what the state planning policy said. And when I read these policies at the time, I asked local politicians, state government politicians, how enforceable these policies are. And one of the local politicians said to me, they said, well, John, does the policy say that local governments must do these things or should do these things? And I said, well, it says they should do these things. And that politician said, well, there you go. Should doesn't mean that they have to do it. And then there was a dinner that the state government had in Cairns. And it was at the time when Anna Bligh was Premier. And I was invited to it. And I sat at it was a lunch dinner. And I sat next to a politician. And I asked this particular politician why they did that. Why do you put should in there and not must? So, you know, it's not, you know, local governments don't have to do anything. And he said, well, John, it's all about wiggle room. And I said, what does that mean, wiggle room? Well, we need to allow developers to be able to wiggle out of these policies so they don't have to follow them. I went, oh, okay. So basically what they are is they're policies which make it look like the government's doing something, but in reality, they're doing nothing at all, because it's not enforceable. It's not legislation. And we continue to have these sorts of natural hazards policies and programs and assessment strategies developed, which don't have any bite. You know, they're not enforceable, and it makes it look like something's happening, but nothing really is happening.
Well, all I can say is these people need to go and do a little bit of contract law and contract writing, because when you want something to happen, you've got to put in there shall. Shall is the word there is no wiggle room. If you're writing a contract to buy something and you want this thing to do something, you write shall. You don't write should or even must. Is a bit ordinary, but gee whiz, to overcome this, you need the word shall in there, and you shall not do this and you shall not do that. There's no wiggle room at all.
Well, that's right. But I agree completely. But, you know, these documents and programs are designed to have wiggle room so that they're not enforceable, so that, you know, it's a smokescreen. I know I'm being blunt here and people in government won't like what I'm saying, but it is. The reality is it's a smokescreen, and it's a feel-good policy. It says all the right things and, you know, we're thinking about this, we're concerned about this, but nothing changes. We continue to build right on the coast. We continue to build on floodplains, and all of these policies do nothing, absolutely nothing.
And the politicians hope that they'll be out of hospice and retired on their pension before anything does happen.
Well, maybe. I don't know. But I mean, you know, we need we need people, we need the governments at all levels to really put down enforceable policies. Well, I know policies, but enforceable legislation, you know, with the correct wording that makes it enforceable, that's, you know, unequivocal, that stops the wiggle room in these documents and makes it such that it is safe for people to build in locations where they're not going to be subject to these extreme events. And people can know that and be confident and feel safe that these things aren't going to happen to them. Because at the moment they're building blindly, they're buying blindly, and, you know, they don't really fully understand how dangerous a location they're buying in.
I suppose the other thing is it's not just major events, it's just cyclic events like high tides and king tides. I mean, it was only last week, I think, we had a bit of a onshore wind event, plus we had a very hot king tide, and basically around the harbour lights and those streets down in that corner were inundated. But you'd also notice that we've got a lot of drains and that around, and if it wasn't for the gates that operated at certain spots along those drains, the water tidal surge would push way into places like Moorabool and Menunda. That's how far they can push if it wasn't for those gates that could be operated. And that's not a real big weather event. That's just, you know, a normal monthly or couple of monthly cycle.
Yep, that's exactly right. Yes, I mean, those tides were, you know, the water was coming over into the street at Palm Cove. You know, sand was being washed onto the road. I mean, it wasn't flooding shops or anything, but it was coming over onto the road. You know, that tells you straight away, we're not even looking at a cyclone. It's just a king tide, a high spring tide, as you say, with a bit of an onshore wind event, and we're getting inundation of what's normally dry land. So, you know, imagine what's going to happen when we get a really big cyclone just to the north of us.
Okay, we've gone the hour, but if you could just give us a bit of an indication what priorities, or what we should give priority in the near term as we go into discussions about fixing up the effects from Jasper. What areas would you pick on? I mean, the airport has to be fairly concerning, because you'd always want that to operate in a time of disaster. You do want air access in and out for supplies, get people evacuated, medical supplies in, food supplies and things like that in a big event. But that's fairly concerning that we could have our airport closed down. I don't know, well, that was 5 days. We could have it, you know, closed down for an extended period. We have this situation along the Barron River, inland a bit, Kurunga and that, and then down on the River Delta itself. So what areas do you think should be earmarked for priority, as in, well, let's make some firm decisions about the way we go forward here?
Well, I mean, yeah, we do. I mean, obviously, you know, we could look at things, immediate things like the airport, hospitals, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, these are huge, massive, enormous economic challenges. I mean, you know, can we just pick up the airport and move it? Well, that's going to be unbelievably expensive. Can we just pick up and move the hospitals? Unbelievably expensive, you know, beyond government budgets, et cetera. So, you know, at the moment, these are sort of economic or virtually economic impossibilities, I would think. And that's how governments are going to see it. So what can we do? We can tinker around and talk about levees and various sorts of structures, you know, stopping Tomatis Creek from becoming the main mouth of the Barron River, and various sorts of other things. We can do all that, but what really, really needs to be done needs to be a change of attitude at all government levels. I'm going to be really blunt here and say that the problem rests with government and governments. We need firm policies that actually do something. We need proper legislation, properly worded legislation that has real bite and stops putting people in the path of these events, people and assets, that is their properties, etc., in the path of these assets. We need to do something about this. That's where it needs to occur, because at the moment, it's still allowed to occur, and it's going to continue to occur. You know, we're going to have short memories about this recent flood event in Cairns. And in 20 years' time, you know, people come and go, and, you know, there's going to be pressure to continue developing across the floodplain and in the beaches, etc. And until we actually get to the root cause of this, and the root cause is government policy and government legislation, till we rectify that problem, will we ever really be able to do anything about this? So that's my sort of take-home message. That's where it needs to change, right there, first and foremost.
And I suppose the big factor could be the fact that insurance companies will never insure us somewhere along the line, and that would have to make people balk in regards to moving to Cairns if they could. I thought they could never insure their $1 million property asset that they're saving for their children's inheritance or something like that.
Yeah, we're killing the golden goose. I mean, you know, Cairns is a wonderful place. It's unbelievably beautiful. It's a great place to live. You know, it's great for retirees. It's great to bring up family. You know, it's just a magnificent place to live. It really, really is. And we're sort of, and then when I say it's a golden goose, it is a golden goose. But you know, we're killing it off because of exactly those things. You know, apart from the reef and the rainforest and the various environmental threats and problems that are going on there, you know, we're making it a really, really dangerous place for people to come to. And people won't want to come here to live, and people will be turned off when they think, oh, well, maybe there's going to be a disaster there. Okay, the dry season might be nice and safe, but the wet season might be really dodgy. You know, they don't want to be impacted by that. So we're doing ourselves a disservice. We've got a golden goose right now. Let's keep it and nourish it and feed it and preserve it. That's what we need to do.
Yeah, but the other thing is the people in charge need to understand its limitations in regards to being a safe place to live.
They do, and that's done through effective policy and legislation. That's how it's done. The consent authorities need to take this and be responsible for this and do something about it, rather than pandering to the economic interests of a minority and a powerful minority. And that's why we have the problem that we have. We have a saying, you know, in this business, disasters only occur due to poor planning. And the way to fix it is through more effective planning. But it's not the planners that are the problem here. It's the consent authority. You know, they're allowing these things to occur. So that needs to change. That's the root cause. Fix up the planning via the consent authority and stop putting people in the path of these events.
Okay, John, I think we've covered it very well tonight. I really thank you for your time, and I really appreciate you coming on. Maybe we can come back some other time after we start getting a bit of information of what they're going to fix and what they're not going to fix, or how they're going to fix it, and give some sort of evaluation. Well, are they doing the right thing, or are they leading us down to more false security?
Yeah, well, that's right. And you know, we need the community to be involved. Definitely, it's got to be a community-based decision, and you know, see what the community wants, I think is also really important. But I'd be very happy to come back and talk about that when and if all of that occurs.
Okay, John, look, thanks very much for your time. If you just stay on the line, we'll have a little bit chatter. I'll just introduce next week's show.
Okay.
All right, thanks very much, John. If you enjoyed tonight's show, please like, share, and subscribe to our Facebook page and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Join us again next week, and I'll be talking to Glenn Smith, a cotton farmer and cotton gin owner down in the southwest of Queensland. And we'll be talking about the northern Murray-Darling Basin and its water allocations, and what their feel is on the extra requirement for environmental water to flow to South Australia. So please join me again next week when we have Southwest farmer and cotton gin owner Glenn Smith join us. Thank you.